I worked on Kpop Demon Hunters. Here's why Sony Animation is beating Disney. Everyone thinks Disney is the king of animation, but Kpop Demon Hunters showed exactly why Sony's pulling ahead. What we'll talk about, I'll break down what makes Sony's approach different, why it matters, and what this means for the future of animation. Who am I? I am Dwayne Elahie. I'm a CG Supervisor, been in the industry for 20 plus years, mentoring for 15 plus years, both online, offline. Lots of my students now work in the industry, making 70K plus in annual salary. These are the places I've been at: EA, ILM, Pixar, Disney. And we haven't met yet, but you've met my work. Netflix, The Witcher, James Cameron, The Avatar, and I've worked on Sony ImageWorks and other projects such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, where I was a character rigging supervisor. You may have seen these films and TV shows such as Kpop Demon Hunters, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Claudio the Chancey Meatballs, Avatar, Marvel projects, Hunger Games, and many others. You can look it up on my IMDb page over here. But before we get into that, I want to talk about Brian Tyndall. If you don't know who he is, he worked at Pixar, Disney for about 15 years. You've seen his projects, Brave, Up, Incredibles, WALL-E. You can see he's been there since the beginning, since Finding Nemo. You can look him up on IMDb. He's a 2-time award winner in the Visual Effects Society Awards over here for Brave and Up as well here. But why I'm bringing him up is because there's so many tutorials out there on YouTube, but the people who are actually doing this on the high level, there's a very small community and we all know each other. And he wrote a book that I would say is, I think if you're going to be serious about this, everyone should read this book, because this is actually how it's done. At least the best public-facing information and actually how to rig and do articulate facial animation for feature animations such as Kpop Demon Hunters or any Disney or any Pixar, Illumination, DreamWorks characters, right? And the main thing about it is that I've talked about this before in other videos, but the technology supports the art. So what's driving under it is a lot of the things that are done in back-end fundamentals. Remember, I keep saying it's best to know the fundamentals. For animation, The Illusion of Life by Disney Animation is the Bible of animation. If you hear The 9 Old Men, it's from this book. And this book is how to articulate this. And pretty much every studio, Pixar, Disney, Sony, DreamWorks, Illumination, those are the guys who do the Despicable Me movies and the Mario movies and things like that. They're all based off trying to get the final art, and their technology, they all might have different ways of they do it, their rigs or tools, but pretty much the animators, the riggers, the articulators, the modelers are all the same people and going around from different studios. What I want to show here, I have a podcast where I interview a lot of my peers, other professionals in the industry, and I interviewed Brian Tyndall, and I'm just going to show a clip of this interview where I ask him if it's okay if I teach his techniques from his book and to apply it, because I think, again, the best public-facing information on how to do this stuff in feature animation is from this book. Of course, when working at Sony ImageWorks and every other studio, they have their own proprietary, their own learning and teaching and training inside. And unless you're working there, the public doesn't know about it. So when you go on YouTube and you see people telling you how movies are made, that is not the training that actually is done. This is probably the best you'll get. So I just want to show you the clip of the interview I had with Brian Tyndall. I was thinking of like doing some tutorials, and I wanted to use your techniques to just demonstrate how to actually implement them from your book. I wanted to know if that's okay with you, or if you want to be.
Yeah. Here's the thing that I told everybody on stuff. I said, steal my ideas, because they're really not my ideas. They're just I've learned along the way and thought a different way of doing it. I never, I didn't just come up with like, I think this is the coolest way to do it. No, I've come across that I came up with that I'm like, how the people ask, how did I do that addition for those things? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm sure I saw it because there's no way I could think of it. But I always tell people, take my idea. If you want to give me credit, that works great. If you don't give me credit, I'm not going to be flustered. And it's like, hey, I came up with this 3-way principle. It's like, that's just like mine. Well, the industry knows it's a small industry. As people try to bull people, they know. So it's like, I look at it as like everything we do in animation is piggybacked off somebody else's failure that they couldn't do. And we figured that out. And we figured this out or that out, It's like the way these big hotshot guys that are big animators and they go around and they do all the talks and stuff. And they're so good from all the different studios that do stuff. They learned all that.
Yeah, exactly.
The 9 old men. And those guys really had to make it up, but they make it sound like it's a great idea. I came up with this cool idea. They're just not giving them credit or reference. But anybody that's a veteran in the industry knows, like, oh yeah, that's Bob's technique. That's Sydney's technique. Like, these are things. Oh, that's a spin off of Sydney and Bob. That's kind of cool. I want to twist that and make it Brian's way. So feel free to. And that's what I want. I want people to, take that information and what you think works and what you think doesn't work, throw that away, and then piggyback on what you want to piggyback on what you thought worked, and come up with a whole new twist. And said, hey, I was looking at this research from this guy, and I came up with a blend of it. And I think that is the only way that great teaching and great knowledge gets passed, is by not protecting it, but just letting it flow. And
all right, so a couple of things he mentioned in there. One, if you look at, I was talking about my past videos not too long ago, maybe like 2-3 videos before, I talk about mentoring and apprenticeship and literally learning and copying from other people. And when people think they're being original, not really, because a lot of people, let's say a lot of animators might say I made this up, but a lot of stuff come from here and they just might put their spin on it or mixing between it. Again, you can watch that video for what I'm talking about, but basically what I want to get out of that is that he's okay with me showing some of his techniques. And again, I highly recommend you get his book. It's on Apple Books. And I believe I even in an interview asked him why specifically on Apple Books instead of Amazon. I have a book out on Amazon, and I did an audiobook, and I asked him why he didn't use that platform. And he mentioned at the time, just Apple allowed him to set it up how he wants to do it, because he has videos in here explaining it, and you can see it over here. It's excellent book. If you're serious about working professionally at the highest level at Sony ImageWorks, Disney, Pixar, you have to learn this stuff, because this is the basis of it, which he gave me permission. So I'll show you how it works. I mean, in this case, I'm going to be using Maya to show like a character, right? And for example, this is the character, and basically when you create a character, you have to learn how to model it and set up the look development, which is surfacing, meaning the materials and the lighting. So if I turn this on, you see the final render. It's going to update as we do it. It has the lighting and the materials on here, and the character is posed, and it's built in a certain way. If you're going to work at the highest level, we'll split up a certain way, and we actually have a course teaching how this is done. And when you're at these major studios, for example, at Pixar here, when I was mentioning before, you have to have the ability to copy, because you have to, as a character artist, you have to be able to model this, be able to rig it, and be able to make it look like it's on model. So this is how that works here. And like you could see, this is live. You could take this and you move the light, you'll see it actually move. I'll just undo that for a second here. I'll just stop this from rendering. Usually when you create a character, it starts off with like a T pose or an A pose or however, and then you could take the controls here and you could pose it for how you want. And this is kind of like the basis of animation. And this is why I mentioned a lot of times that just having an ArtStation portfolio is not going to get you the job, because we have to see, are you able to make it move? Are you able to place this and actually could hold a pose? And when you move it around, rendering at different angles like this, does it actually hold up? And not only that, there's actually a method to the madness. Again, if you read his book, there's a way you actually have the topology. That is the way the faces and the edges are laid out, is so it's able to deform. You could see his mouth over here, it has a certain shape, and that is actually by design. If you read the classic book, Illusion of Life, you'll learn the principles. That's why it's super important, and I mention all the time, learn the fundamentals and the principles, because that is the guiding factor. And then 2, you have to be able to do the technical parts of creating it and artistically make it look like what it's supposed to. But remember, the technology is meant to support the art. And then 3, you have to be able to articulate and set up the flow to make sure you could get the art direction notes that they want you to do. So how is that flow set up? So now that we've done this, you've seen this is kind of like a final version. And I always say complexity is compound simplicity. It's actually made up of a lot of simple things. So let's fall back. So for example, when I'm working on projects that I was the character rigging supervisor for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, every character, everything that moved went through me, and I have to guide and approve how this is set up. The same thing if you're going to be working on projects like Kpop Demon Hunters, they say, oh, it's original. Actually, there's a methodology that has to be consistent, that's standardized, that everybody on the project works on. So make sure it works. So what am I talking about here? Again, this layout is described in Brian Tyndall's book, again, The Art of Moving Points, and there's a reason why it's laid out this way, which he explains why. There's a reason why there's like these, for example, junction points. You see in the junction point over here, if I select this mesh, for example, and I'll go into edge mode, you'll see, or actually go into vertex mode here, you'll see that this is a junction point. It's a star, the meaning more than 4 edges that are on it. So if I go to edge mode, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason why of that, because that means it's a change of direction of flow. So if I select, let's say that edge, hold control, go to ring select, hold control, and go back, go to faces here, you'll see it creates a selection here, and those flows are concentric, matters for the deformation. These colorations matter as well in terms of what gets deformed, where the flow is going to change. And this is mapped to every single character. Right now it's flat because in his book, he's training people how this works. And this is actually how it's done in studios. When I set this up at Sony ImageWorks, actually, I've seen other people comment on how, wow, they really push the envelope for Kpop Demon Hunters, for the facial expressions and how it's done. A lot of those tools that I built were actually done like 10, 15 years ago. It was one of the mandate was actually to be put on the Popeye movie, which never came out. But if you go on YouTube and look up Popeye shorts, a Popeye short film or like a teaser from Sony ImageWorks, you'll see a lot of the work that I've done in there that was meant as a test bed to push the facial animation and to push what can be done 2D wise, because the Popeye cartoon was like in the 1930s or 1920s or something like that. And I had to go, my mandate, I had to sit down for like weeks, just sit down and watch Popeye cartoons and figure out how it moves, because it's 2D animation. You see his mouth all the way on the side here, and then let's switch sides. The mouth have to go on the other side over here. And we had to figure out how to do that. A lot of those findings are now built into the base of how the characters are made. And then I make training materials. And as you could see, the results in Kpop Demon Hunters and like Spider-Man and all that, those are the results of it. But underlying, this is what we're actually mapping. Every character have this layout or something similar, because this is Brian Tyndall's version and how I guess Pixar does it specifically. But every studio have their own version of it, but the same. Their implementation, their software they might use might be different, but the principles, the tactics, the strategies, are all the same. And one thing about this, another thing is, he called this a training mesh because it's flat. And the reason why is so you could understand what's happening before you change it to 3D. So for example, we have, if I go in here and let's say I have different inputs, the same thing we have in like when I was working at Sony ImageWorks and other places, other places I implement this too, like when I worked in like EA and whatnot, all the meshes have these layouts, so we know how it's going to deform. And when I bring on someone on my team, like let's say a junior, I said, okay, well, we're going to deform the inner eyelid. And if you're going to put that over here like this, right? So I have another topology or basically layout or UVs to show them, okay, this section. And if you read his book, or The Art of Moving Points, you'll understand what these mean. These gray areas are meant to be like rigid, or he calls them one-to-one zone in his book, and he calls it munging because he has a certain terminology for it. But same idea. When you move these up and down, this inner part will move up and down, and this gray area, this darker gray, is rigid, one-to-one movement. It'll move up and down. This lighter gray will kind of like fall off, and this border is where it stops moving. So you know the fall off. This will be one-to-one. This will fall off, and it will stop in here. And then, okay, and you have the same thing on the other side, on the top and the bottom. And then if I say, okay, now we're going to do the inner part of that's the inner. Going to do the middle part of the eye. This is going to be rigid when you move it up and down. And this is going to be fall off. And this is where it ends, the border. Or actually, in this case, this is the border. So the movement will not affect as much out here as well. And same thing with the outer eye, same idea. And this is just the outer face. The book describes every other zone. So for example, if we go in here and we say, let's say twist. So this all here is going to be like rigid, and here's going to fall off when you twist, use the control to twist the eye. And over here, again, one-to-one zones, these are rigid. So if you're going to move the eyebrows up and down, these are the zones that stay, and these are the fall off that kind of absorbs the deformation. Same thing here. And this is just the upper face. I have all these zones described for many different parts of the face and how they come together. And again, you can read his book for that. Now, that is the breakdown of this, and that this goes into every character here. That when you go back and look at every single Pixar character or DreamWorks character or Sony ImageWorks character, they'll have that flow or that methodology principle built into it for that over here, right? Now we understand that. So what happens? Again, this is flat. It's easy to show it because a lot of these principles came from 2D, but the main idea is to project these same ideas into, and I put it off here, from 2D to 3D. So if I take that and we go move this out, this gets deformed into a 3D version of it, right? And again, he explains this in his book. This is what we do in all the major studios to some degree. Of course, when at Sony ImageWorks, I made the tutorial. I was hired specifically to build these out. That's why I was brought there, and I made the tools for it, and I made a lot of the documentations for it. Of course, over the years and while you're doing, there's a lot of collaborators and whatnot, but that was what I was meant for. And then when I went to EA, they hired me to do the same thing, but in real time also. And I did this, by the way, for feature animation and also for VFX, where realistic, like Avatar or human digital doubles, where you switch them, you can't tell which one. Well, you're meant to replace a real life photorealistic character, right? And then when I went to EA, Electronic Arts, I did the same thing, but in real time. In fact, I got a patent for it. If you Google my name, you'll see. So the things about that is that what I want to show for this is that there is a lot of things going on under, and you still have these same things applied. If you go into here, you go to inner eye, you'll move, but it's in 3D now. But he shows it in 2D so you understand the concept. And when you go into 3D, you're trying to do the same thing. When you're doing art direction and you're going to dailies, they're expecting those same 2D effects, but it's up to you as the articulator, the rigger, the character artist, to make sure those effects still happen, but in 3D. So that's when you start using all these other techniques of how you have to deform it on the more the technical side. But those are the details, right? The main thing is you're trying to make sure the principles and the foundations are there, still held up. Now, what are the principles and foundations? Let me just show the twist, same thing here, and the one-to-one. Now, to break it down even further, like I said, complexity is just compound simplicity, right? So if we go here, this is the first thing that in the book, The Art of Moving Points, and if you're working on any other project, this is the foundation, like the smallest element. What Brian Tyndall called it the 3-curve principle. But basically, what it is that you have pretty much a line. When we say these one-to-one zones, if we go back here, right? And let's say, I go to like inner eye, for example, right? What will happen is, why these spans matter. If I go in here and let's say I go to edge, I selected edge, hold control, ring select, go back here, here. See, you'll see that there's these lines here. We have like color zones for that too, but you have this one line, right? And you'll have that same like one line as well for the lips. And I showed as well over here for the one-to-one zones. You have the same idea here, the same idea for the brows. So when you actually here, that's what I was trying to show. Like I actually showed it out here. So imagine this you go to the edge here, and you have this line like that, right? All you're really doing, if we simplify it, this is what it is, right? And what the 3-curve principle is that you're always trying to make a curve where, and when I show the inner, mid, and out, this is the in, it goes up and down. And that's what the control does really. The mid goes up and down, and that's all it does really. And here it goes up and down, right? So when you go here, when you use those controls, when we say, okay, here, the inner eye, when we say, okay, we want this part to go up and down, and that's the area that's affected, here is rigid, and here's a fall off, this is what we're talking about. When you break it down into simplest forms, you're doing this. That's the inner, right? And then when we say, okay, we want to go to the mid here, I'll just switch to mid like this, and I'll then you move this up and down. That's what's happening here. This is going to the mid, you're moving that up and down. And same thing with the out. The out goes up and down like that. If you go here, I say, okay, when I'm telling my team, I'm like, okay, I want you to work on this part outer, and I want that to go up and down. This is what they were doing. And one other thing as well, because of the way it's designed and we have to do thousands of characters, this is standardized, and this is why in my advanced version of the course I teach coding, because I can have multiple people work on a rig at the same time because it's built the same way. So I could have someone, okay, while you're working on the inner, maybe someone is working on the outer, and then we'll build it to combine. And I know this is advanced. This is much more advanced to explain how that works in a major studio, but at the end, all these systems, what happened, you get this final effect that you see here on a character. This is actually how it works, right? So it's a bunch of simple things being built up. Now, and again, from here, we apply the principles from 2D like this, and let me just switch it back to the central spans here. Well, the zone, so we know where the layout is meant to be the same for every character, which means it's consistent. You could do an animation on one and just transfer it to every character on the show, and it will still work because of the way it's designed. And yeah, this is shown in 2D. It has to work in 2D, and then you bring it out into 3D and it'll work, right? Now, for here, what happens, you work on the simplest form, and then everything else you try to make it technically work. I just want to show how this works, and usually what happens when you actually working on a project and you have an art direction. For example, again, the technology is meant to support the art. So the art is driving the technology. So the reason why you're doing this, and again, this is where you need to know the fundamentals, read the Illusion of Life to understand what we're artistically going for target-wise. If you select this, and for example, these are the shapes. This is just to show you behind the scenes. There's so many ways you could build this. Doesn't really matter as long as you get the final effect. But in the simplest forms, you can make blend shapes or morph targets depending on what software you're using. They're all the same thing. They all do the same thing. And this is actually the shapes you're creating. And again, this is explained in Brian Tyndall's book, The Art of Moving Points. And if you want to work at all the major studios, you have to understand this, because this is what we're aiming for. And your tech has to be able to support this. So what does this mean? For example, they're designed in a specific way that when, let's say you do inner that goes up, and then you do outer, the outer part that goes up, you want the mid part to combine, and you want a specific shape. And this is what, when you go into dailies and the art director is looking at it, they're like, yeah, I like that shape, but it's not round enough. Actually, I want it to bow a little more, so bias it a little higher and go down here. So what you'll do will be like, okay, how about this? If I go into the mid here in my build, that's what's actually making that shape. For me to, in this case, how I set it up, for me to edit it out, I have to put it out here. I'll go in and go to select these things, and I'll take this and move it up. I'm like, okay, you want it a little more like this. I'll select these, this is the final shape, and this is the driving part. You're like, okay, you want it, let's say, more biased out here. Maybe you want it to, the art direction says move it, a little, let it have a little more bias out here. So that means I'm going to take that building shape and bring that out a little more. And then you'll go back, is that what you want? They're like, yeah, okay, maybe here, maybe this is too straight, and maybe make that a little rounder. I'll select these because you want to make it mirror. I'm like, okay, and then you say, okay, that's perfect. Okay, great. Now you have the shape. So then your rig or your setup, however it's built, because there's so many different ways you could do it, you go back, you put in this new iteration, and then hide it again. Put that back in the middle here just for organization. And okay, it's hide is under the hood again. And now when we go back and zero these out, the controls, I say, okay, I can move this up, I can move that up, and then now that gives the shape that they're asking for. And you go to dailies, they're like, yeah, that's perfect. So that's how, in really quickly, you iterate through it, and that's what they're looking for. They don't really know how it's built under it. And it doesn't even matter. There's a million ways I could have built this. I use blend shapes, I could have used skinning, I could have made my own plugin. I could, but it doesn't really make any sense for me to do that. And the main idea is you're trying to hit the art direction for that. And then this is on the simplest form, but this is happening everywhere on the face here. This is happening on the eyes, the eyelids, the mouth, the cheek over here, the brows. And then there's how you combine it. It gets a lot more complicated. And again, you learn this to practice it in the book. They teach you on the flat face. And then you want to, the difference between this and the 3D faces, you're trying to do the same thing, but you actually have to compensate for the 3D dimensional part to get the look. You have to get the deformation to match and make sure it slides across the skull, or at least gives you that feeling. Same thing here. You want to make it look like it's sliding across here. Eye as well. That is more the technical side of things. And again, at the end, all this gets built up into a character that we all know and love, and this gets put into films. And all these systems all build up to make these things. And then the highest level of animation is that you don't even realize that you really believe that is a living, breathing characters with hopes and dreams and motivation. And what was the scene was he doing before? That'll affect what he's doing now, and then what he's going to do after the scene. Or what is he thinking? For example, if you think of Homer Simpson, you know what type of character he is, and what type of, if he says something really smart, you know that's not his type of character, but he's not real, right? But that's what we're trying to achieve with all these things when you put it all together to make this look seemingly complicated. But when the audience see it, it is something original. It's abstracted to them. They really believe this is real, right? Or at least believe that character comes to life. Quick heads up for all you 3D artists watching this. If you've been grinding away at tutorials and YouTube videos but still feel stuck, I've got something special for you. I'm hosting a 3D character rapid bootcamp workshop where I'll walk you step by step through the exact skills studios actually hire for. It's not theory. This is the stuff that got me hired and working in the industry. If you want to finally build a portfolio that gets callbacks and interviews, hit the link below and grab your spot. Seats are limited, so if you're serious about going pro, this is your chance. So I gave a really quick overview of pretty much the main focal point of the book of Brian Tyndall's The Art of Moving Points. But again, every major studio is doing something to this level on the high-level principle and strategy side. And what drives your character? Of course, Sony ImageWorks, Disney, Pixar, Illumination, DreamWorks. They have their own way of implementing it, but they're all driving the fundamentals in their own rigs, in their own characters, in their own setup. So thank you, Brian, for allowing me to show your techniques, because at least this is public facing. People could look on this, read on it, and if they're interested in how to set it up either in Maya or Blender, that's what my courses are for, because this is the way he designed his book is agnostic. He explains the high level, and he uses Modo, because Modo, the 3D software, because it has one of the concepts of weight containers, which is a more advanced topic. You could basically have different weighting depending on the influence. You could kind of do it in other software, but it's not native. There's other ways to do it, but anyways, the principles can be applied in any 3D software. But One of the things when I give people this book, they say, okay, well, I don't know how to do this in Blender, or I don't know how to do this in Maya. And that's usually what I showed in my course, how to do it step by step. But regardless of how to do it, everyone, if you're serious about character articulation, even if you're a modeler and you're just doing characters, if you want to get a job, you have to understand this, because you're not going to get a job if your characters can't move. And you can't move your characters if you don't know the fundamentals of what we're trying to do when you're trying to move it. And you can't achieve the fundamentals if you don't know technically how to lay out the UVs, how do you lay out the mesh, the topology, the UVs, what the zones mean, what are the different, like what are junction points, what are anchor, what are things that are meant to be one-to-one, what are things that be transition. He has his own terminology of things, but just the first few chapters explain topology, and you should read this, right? Now that I explained basically the fundamentals of how all feature animation pretty much works, let me go into specifically the topic of what I was talking about, of how Sony is kind of like leading ahead of like Disney, right? One of the things is, again, all fundamentally everyone's doing the same things, but one, they take creative risks and they pay off, right? I've also seen some people critique the latest stuff in Pixar. They don't like the style. They're trying risky things as well, and not everything pays off. That's why if you want to see new things, you could watch independent films, but a lot of things won't land with people because commercial things are proven to work, and that's why people keep doing new things. But Sony has been trying to do creative risk, and it's been playing off, and other people's been adopting it. I mentioned Spider-Verse. Look at Kpop Demon Hunters. You're going to see a lot of copycats now for that. Even Spider-Verse, it's greatly inspired Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because of that style. That's just how it works, right? The thing is, Disney, if you like I mentioned here, they have the Illusion of Life over here, and they pretty much set the standard. Even anime was started off trying to mimic, and then they branch off to their own style for the Illusion of Life. So Disney often sticks to their safer formulas. They made the formula, right? So, and they have that legacy. The other thing that Sony's doing, it's global storytelling. It's right now Sony's tapping into the diverse cultures. K-pop is really popular right now. A lot of people didn't even know what it was, and now after seeing that movie, they're loving it. It's trending right now as well. It's reaching, especially with the internet and social media, it's reaching a wider audience. Disney hasn't really adapted quickly enough because they have a huge catalog. They have the history. They're known for animation. The Nine Men, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnson, and like the 7 others. If you're an animator, you know who you are. You have to read this stuff. Just like if you're an animator, I think you have to read this. I think it's mandatory. And if you are serious about facial rigging, facial articulation, character design, character modeling, being a character artist in feature animation, I think this is mandatory as well. Learn from the best, award-winning. These guys are the pioneers of this stuff, right? So you should learn what they're doing. And the third thing, pipeline and innovation. I know on it because I worked on it there. You know, their tech and their workflow allow faster experimentation, pushing the medium forward instead of holding it back. So a lot of stuff you see on Kpop Demon Hunters here, there's a lot of experimentation I personally have done, and many others. I'm not the only one there. There's a lot of other talented people. As Brian Tyndall mentions, we all know who we are. It's a small industry, and we're just going around from different studios, whether they're at Pixar now, then they're at Disney, then they're at DreamWorks or at Sony. So I heard a comment saying, wow, the animators at Sony are the best right now. It's the same animators as at Disney and Pixar. Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, Illumination, the same pool of people. Same thing with the character artists, same thing with the riggers. When a new project come up, we get contact because the people in there know we're able to do these things. And if you want to be able to do this as well, you got to learn the techniques. You got to learn what these guys are doing. Yeah, it's cool to watch stuff on YouTube, and they give you some good insights. That's cool, and might give you a tip or trick here and there, but they're not the ones actually doing it. You should learn, if you want to learn how to do it, learn from the people who are actually doing it, right? And yeah, it's I mentioned all of that, the pipeline, the tech, the workflow, and innovation for that, right? So to recap, Sony's winning because they take risks, tell fresh stories, and innovate in ways that Disney can't or won't. The next step, if you want to stay ahead as an artist, study studios that experiment, not just the safe ones, right? Again, at the same time, you still learn the main principles and still learn if you want a job, what's being done out there. But the ones that are taking risks are the ones who are out there trying to set new trends. You should see how that's being done. And then bonus tip, look at Sony's art books, behind the scenes breakdown. There's more learning in there because they show you what actually has been done than most animation courses, because they'll just show you the typical things that you could literally read in instruction manuals or the documentation of, let's say, Blender or Maya. This is how you do an IK, and this is how you do vertex weighting or paid weights or something like that. That alone is not going to get you a job. You have to understand the principles of it and why the technology is driving those things, right? And the biggest mistake to avoid, don't assume the biggest studios always leads the future. Follow the innovators, not just the traditional, the tradition keepers or the traditional studios such as Disney. Yes, they set the trend and they still are the standard, but anime deviated from that. Anime started trying to do the principles of animation, and due to constraints, they start making their own style. And look how popular that is now. In fact, Demon Slayer is out, and I think we're going to talk about that in a video because of how they do their style. It's pretty interesting. If you look at Looney Tunes and how that's being done, because of the limitations of television, they had to animate on 2s and 3s and they couldn't do motion blur and things like that. And they came up with their own style with that too. So, and that is still used today, and people try to mimic that. So you should also follow the innovators, right? So what are your thoughts? Leave your comments below.